and welcome to Dialogue. Our humans have been depending on the sea for centuries. Not only are they the primary sustenance for billions of people, the vast ecosystem also enables economic growth through fisheries, shipping, and a fleet of other industries. As the oceans face mounting pressure from climate change and pollution, the moderate utilization of marine resources and innovating blue economy models are high on the international agenda. How urgent is it for us to progress faster in the sustainable use of the oceans? And how can the world benefit from investing in ocean conservation? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. In the first half of the program, I spoke to former managing director of the World Economic Forum, Claude Smadja. We started the conversation on ocean sustainability and its significance.
The notion of sustainability, which for many years was a kind of lip service notion, was a kind of theoretical notion, feel good. Today people realize that it is a kind of do or die, and for a very simple reason. Because we are going to ask more and more to the oceans. We need more and more food coming from the ocean. We need more and more contribution from the ocean to the fight against climate change. We need more and more resources from the ocean on domains like pharmacy, pharmaceutical product, wellness product, treatments for some very severe illnesses. We need more and more from the ocean in terms of renewable energies like wave energy, like offshore wind energy, and so on and so forth. And because we are going to ask more and more, we need to make sure that these resources will continue to be available. And if we continue like that, destroying our oceans, then these resources will die, and we will die with them. And so it has become today a matter of, I was about to say, almost survival to ensure the sustainability of our ocean. And in addition to that, there is now a clear awareness that the issue of protection and restoration of the ocean ecosystem and the fight against climate change are intertwined. You cannot have one without the other. If we don't have, through different capabilities like algae, like coral reef, the ability for blue carbon capture being developed, then we can continue to decarbonize our activities. But nevertheless, climate change will continue to evolve. And so we need healthy ocean to be able to fight efficiently against climate change. So this is why sustainability is today not just anymore a buzzword, but it is a do or die reality.
Are you saying that there's complete or full awareness basically in the international community and on country level that it's the time to act?
I think there is an awareness. I think we have seen, for instance, I think we have seen in the last few years, for instance, the problematic of sustainability has become a very important element in the thinking of the Chinese government, of the Chinese leadership. This notion was not so present 7 or 10 years ago. It is now very present. We have seen that other countries realize that, again, it is something like a do or die issue. As people say, there is today more plastic in the ocean than there are fish. And so finalizing and implementing forcefully the international treaty against plastic pollution is today a priority. So I think there is this awareness, I think there is this impulse to act. The issue is, are countries acting fast enough? And I think in this issue, we have a problem. I think the processes for countries to get together and agree on expanding global ocean governance, making it more efficient, we see that it is a very long process. There is a very long process because on the one hand, there are national interests which are not always aligned, but also because in each country there are diverging elements, diverging interests, there are diverging views, and so all of this slow down the whole process, complicate the whole process. Are we acting fast enough? I don't think so. But there is action going. There have been a good progress in terms of global governance, but it is not enough. It is not fast enough. And I think the challenge is really to accelerate that.
I know you are also working with the Chinese side, the China Oceanic Development Foundation, for example, to better tap into the blue economy resources of China. Tell us more on that.
No, I think we have been asked 5 years ago to create another forum on the blue economy in Shenzhen. And this was an expression of Chinese policy to, in a way, develop the blue economy as a much more important element, segment of the overall Chinese economy. And in fact, this trend was in parallel to the trends that we see in many other countries, because the blue economy is, in a way, an economy of the future. It is a way to try to create resources which, if we manage them well, can be infinite. And so this has, in a way, led me to think more and more about this part of the economy, to get more and more interested in what is happening in the technological domain and how technology is being now leveraged to increase the knowledge we have of the ocean ecosystem, to see more closely what other countries or regions are doing. And what is interesting is that you realize that in many countries, many coastal countries, in fact, their blue economy is completely underdeveloped, underutilized, and in a way it is dilapidated. And this is a trend that needs to be stopped, because again, it is not a matter of one country dilapidating its marine resources. What happens there has global repercussions.
Let's move on to the global economy. I know you are a keen observer. You follow closely the global economy, global politics. A few years back, you wrote an op-ed in which you refuted the idea that globalization is in retreat. You said, I quote, "We are witnessing a major course correction at play. This might be the end of arrogant globalization and the beginning of a painful learning of humility by the business and other establishment elites that had considered that globalization meant a blank check for them."
Up to the beginning of the 21st century, you had this very arrogant view from the global business community that in fact they were the key players. And we heard that, for instance, in Davos, it was like, oh, governments, step aside, let us do our job, and the world will be much better. And in fact, when people were putting into question some aspect of globalization, the way to dismiss that was, oh, these people don't understand globalization. In fact, they were critical of some aspect of globalization because they understood too well what globalization meant for them. And what happened is that because of this hubris in the Western countries, Europe and the US, government completely neglected to prepare their population to the shock that globalization would bring to them. Because at the end of the day, it meant for the middle classes in Europe and the US the end of acquired advantages. And this became apparent when people realized that globalization was not anymore a one-way street. Oh, this is fantastic, we can sell our product to emerging market countries. But it was becoming a two-way street. Emerging market countries were, in a way, eating the lunch of developed countries. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, there was the competition from China, there was the competition from India, there was the competition from other countries, because one thing happened that the Western world completely underestimated, which is the incredible shrinking of time to knowledge. And the fact that these countries, India, China, Indonesia, were in fact ready to absorb and to leverage new technologies in a much faster way than Europeans. And so what we have today is in fact this notion that because in America and in Europe people are afraid of globalization, are erecting barriers. They are saying, oh, globalization is dead, globalization is in reverse. But it is a view which is just fed by hubris. Because on the one hand, globalization may be at a standstill or even in reverse in Europe and in the US, but it is alive and kicking in the rest of the world, especially in Asia, to some extent in Africa, to some extent in Latin America. They don't see the end of globalization, on the contrary. But in Europe and in the US, all of a sudden, competition has become too severe. And so all of a sudden it is, oh, I need to erect barriers. And you can erect barriers through different alibis: national security, green protectionism, and you can really bet on the tremendous power of imagination in Europe and in the US to find new alibis to erect protectionist barriers when the competition becomes too harsh.
Thank you, Claude. Thank you for speaking with us.
No, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
In the second half of the show, I spoke with Peter Thomson, the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. Ambassador.
Sure, thanks for the welcome and thanks for the invitation to be on the show.
For those who are not following closely about the ocean development, can you talk more about what are the challenges, what are the major problems we are facing with the ocean?
Well, one need only look at SDG 14 and its targets, and that's easily available on the internet. But because when you look at those targets, you get those areas that we need to address. So, for example, marine pollution. is the first one. Overfishing would be another one. Fisheries subsidies would be another one. Let me just break those down a bit. So for marine pollution, for example, this is not just about plastic. It's also about chemical pollution and pollution from agriculture and industry. Of course, everything ends up in the sea. It comes off the land, into the rivers, into the sea. So if we take plastic, there's been a calculation that if we continue on our current path, there'll be more plastic in the ocean than there will be fish by 2050. 2050. So that's not very far away. That's a lot of plastic.
That's
But
alarming.
if you look at the plastic production and what's happening to it, it's all ending up in the sea. Well, not all of it. Some goes to landfill. But a great majority of it goes to into the sea, where it breaks down into microplastics. And of course that gets into the whole marine ecosystem, and it comes back to us in the form of fish. And of course we are only now starting to learn the effects of plastic upon human health. That's quite profound. That pollution one is a very important aspect. The other important one would be what we eat, and make sure that we're only eating sustainable fish, from fish stocks that are sustainable. And aquaculture is obviously very important here, sustainable aquaculture. So the fisheries side, we've got to get that right. We have to understand ocean science much better. It is estimated that we only know about 20% of the ocean's scientific properties. So there's a huge amount of work to be done by humanity to better understand the ocean's properties on a scientific basis, because we've got some big decisions to make about our place on this planet, and the ocean is obviously a key part of that decision making.
And like in 2016, you were elected the president of the UN General Assembly. You talked about promoting issues such as climate change and ocean affairs, and also be committed to implementation of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And in 2017, you presided over actually the first UN Ocean Conference with the aim of reversing the trend of declining ocean conditions. Now, as a special envoy of the UN Secretary General, how do you rate our progress of implementing or achieving those goals, in particular in SDG 14?
Okay, well, in terms of the Paris Climate Agreement and the SDGs as a whole, the 2030 agenda, we're definitely behind in our implementation. I mean, that's well accepted, I think, in the international community. This is not a reason to give up. This is a reason to try harder, of course, because this is our blueprint for humanity's survival on planet Earth when you get down to it. So the Paris Climate Agreement, I think things are happening which are very encouraging. It's not all bad news. The move to the green transition, to renewable energy, is there's some great things happening. You look at the price of solar panels, for example, thanks to China, and the way that is now so much more affordable. So that renewable energy is becoming a logical in terms of just the financial side, apart from the scientific side. Now it's financially the right decision to make, to move towards renewable energy, to stop burning fossil fuels, stop the addiction to fossil fuels that our civilizations have got into. So that's happening. The Sustainable Development Goals, no, we just have to try harder. In terms of SDG 14, I'm reasonably confident that by the time we get to 2030, we will have made a big difference by having SDG 14. It was the small island developing countries in particular that pushed for SDG 14's existence. Why? We could see that decline in the ocean's health all around us. We could see it in declining fish stocks, in death of coral, and rising sea levels. And we were insistent that that be part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I say, I think by the time we get to 2030, we will see that we've made a difference.
You are from Fiji, an island nation. Many of the island nations, just in a kind of a similar situation, I would say. they see that's the danger in real time, rising sea levels, pollution, etc. Do you think their voice is being heard?
I think we are listened to, because why? The countries on the big continents, they see that the smaller and developing states are out there on the, let's say, the edge. So if you want to observe change, you need to go to the edges. That's an old principle, right? So we are at the edge of human habitation of the planet, because we're right out there in the ocean. And as I say, we can see the rising sea levels. Why? It's an existential matter for low-lying atoll countries like Tuvalu or Kiribati or Maldives or Marshall Islands. This is existential when you're talking about rising sea levels. And the connection of that to things like melting ice sheets in Greenland or Antarctica, there's a direct connection between, let's say, Tuvalu and Greenland, because there's only one ocean. So that's why I think the people recognize that small and developing states have a special status in terms of their voice. We were one of the first to be alerting about the death of coral. And here we are, we're right now in the middle of the worst ever in history, human history, the worst ever coral bleaching episode around the world is happening right now. So we were, early observers of that. We're early observers of the fact that overfishing is happening, because when we go fishing, the fish aren't there the way they used to be. And so this is anecdotal evidence, but when you put the scientific research into it, you find that our observations are correct and that we need to do the work to stop that decline.
China has been, let's say, in recent years, pretty active on the development of ocean and working together with countries in Southeast Asia, in Africa, island nations. How do you see the Chinese performance in terms of conservation and also the sustainable use of the ocean resources?
There are many answers to that question. I think the main one that for your listeners that I'd really like to underline, and I think as a citizen of China, you should be very proud of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, because Minister Huang of your Ministry of Ecology, he was the president of the process that led from Kunming to Montreal to the adoption of this Global Biodiversity Framework. And for those that haven't heard about the framework, it's a really, really big thing. And what its targets are is basically bring us into an ambition to make peace with nature. We've been at war with nature ever since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And the Global Biodiversity Framework really brings us to, let's say, the peace table with nature. And I'll explain what I mean by that. For example, there's a 30 by 30 target in there to protect 30% of the land and sea of the planet by 2030, 6 years' time. Very ambitious. But we have taken that decision. When I say we, I mean all the countries of the world arrived at that decision in Montreal under President Huang's leadership. We arrived at that consensus. Why? Because the best of our Earth scientists told us that if we did not protect 30% of the planet by 2030, we would start to see a falling away of biodiversity on the planet. There's already 1 million species under threat of extinction. And that in that cascading away of biodiversity, which is life on the planet, that eventually our species could go with it into oblivion.
Speak of that, how important is ocean to the protection of biodiversity?
Yeah, good question. There's actually more biodiversity on land, but then if you look at the planet, 70% of the surface of the planet is ocean, and over 90% of the living space in the biosphere is ocean. So, the biodiversity of the ocean is fundamental to life on the planet. You only have to look at phytoplankton, my hero is a little, I call it my emblem. It's called Prochlorococcus. And it's the tiniest photosynthetic organism on the planet. And it exists in profusion in the ocean, but it produces 20% of the oxygen in the biosphere, 20%. So, you know, if we polluted the ocean to such an extent that Prochlorococcus couldn't survive, we would not survive, because it's 20% of the oxygen supply of the planet.
Lack of oxygen.
This one little creature
Exactly.
does that every day for us.
That's that important.
Yeah, that's biodiversity in action.
What challenges do you see in how to achieve those goals?
Yeah.
Do you perceive any potential challenges from country to country or international?
Look, all of us have within our countries vested interests who, you know, think they're doing the right thing, but you know, in fact they are not. You know, and I put the oil and gas industry in that category. I think that they should be investing in the green transition. The EIA, the Energy Association in Paris, say that only 1% of the investment required for the green transition is coming from the oil and gas industry. You know,
Only 1%.
I find that astounding. You know, if I was on a board of an oil and gas company, I would be saying at least 25% should be coming from us, because we're the ones making the money out of the problem,
Right.
which is, you know, the fact that we've got global warming because of anthropogenic greenhouse gases, and that's coming primarily from the coal, oil, and from gas industries. So they should be a big part of the solution. They need to be bigger in that regard.
And of course, you know, big countries are expected to shoulder, you know, big responsibilities, play a big role. For example, China, US, of course, you know, we all know that the tensions between the two countries, but at the same time, they do agree to talk to each other over climate change, for example, biodiversity protection, basically for our future, right? What's your understanding of their interaction,
you know,
cooperation in that respect?
That's such an interesting point, because yes, there are geopolitical problems in the world, there always are, but look at the amazing progress that's been made on international environmental agreements in the last 5 years. It's just amazing. I mentioned Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. There's things like the BB&J agreement, which is, you know, biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, so-called High Seas Treaty. First time that the high seas will actually be governed internationally. You know, we have the exclusive economic zones of every country, which is provided under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. But now we have this High Seas Treaty where we say we're going to, which is the majority of the planet actually. So this is a big step forward. You know, that was agreed 2 years ago. We're still in the ratification process. We still need China to ratify actually, but I think that'll be coming before middle of next year. I hope we'll see the treaty come into force.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for speaking with us.
My pleasure.